All right, I think we should be live here. Indeed, we are. Hello, everyone. It is Neil here from EDM Tips for another iteration of Tuneful Tuesday. So, I know most of you watching have probably seen this before and know what's up, but for those of you tuning in for the first time, this stream is a chance for us all to get together live once a week. And I'm going to be listening to track submissions from students at EDM Tips and providing my feedback right on the spot. Now, this is obviously a learning opportunity for students submitting tracks, but it's also a phenomenal exercise for anyone out there. If you're listening to this music and you are actively analyzing what you might do to make it better or what's making it work, and you're listening to the comments that I'm giving out and thinking about them and what they mean for that particular track, your ears and your production skills are going to be skyrocketing. We've seen it happen already with the students that have been actively participating in Tuneful Tuesday. So if you are watching for the first time this round, sit back, relax, enjoy it, and hope to see you around again in the future because, again, the continued repetition of this particular exercise is so valuable to everyone involved. So with that, guys, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to dive into some of the track submissions from the members of the Radio Ready program and the EDM Tips Accelerator. I'll be providing my feedback just via audio right on the fly. I encourage you guys watching to also be dropping some comments in the chat, whether it's, some extra support for a particularly dirty drop, or maybe a couple of suggestions to help clean up the mix. Whatever it might be, feel free to drop it in. Let's just have a good time with it, guys. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we will jump straight into it from there. Our first submission of this week is coming from Wesley out of the Radio Ready program. And Wesley's saying, hey Neil, I've added more reverb and delay to the elements during the buildups, and have added some luscious Sound Toys decapitator to the bass, and adjusted the sub bass and kick. Let me know what you think, and peace. Alright, Wesley, let's see what we got going on here with Revelation. Now guys, as always, as I get going, if you wouldn't mind just confirming for me that the volume of my voice is well balanced against the volume of the audio here, that would be great. Otherwise, let's see what we got here, Wesley. Really strong start, lovely kick and bass relationship, good balance against the rest of the mix. Nice groove going on here. Love the repetition in that lead with that little variation at the end of the phrase. That's prime writing. Really good job. Cool. Compositionally, you've got a really stellar drop going on here. First thing that I'd probably call out is that I want a little bit more energy and tightness from the drums, not just in the drop, but in general. And I think that this can come from some degree of compression, but with a slow attack. So if you add compression to a sound, but have attacks of like 50 milliseconds or more in that attack, that's going to allow that transient through. And that way, any makeup gain that's applied as a result of the compression is going to bring that transient up. So that can help give your drums a little bit more snappiness, a little bit more punchiness. And then in terms of the energy of the drop, I think that'll help, but obviously that's going to be applied to the build drums as well, so we'll still have a little bit of an imbalance. And I think what's currently going on is that your drop is just, quite frankly, a little bit too quiet. So relative to the other sections, I would bring up the drop an extra decibel in volume, or bring the other sections down in decibel in volume, doesn't really matter. But we need a little bit more energy contrast between those two sections, and I think it's really all going to come from volume. Let's give it a listen in this next drop here. You know what? I think it's because your build textures are just so thick that the drop currently feels a little bit thin in comparison. But I do think that volume will make the difference. You might actually need more than a decibel. It might be looking more like 3 decibels or so of a gain difference between these sections that'll really help make that drop stand out. Yeah, that should do the trick. Otherwise, I'd say your track is in a really, really good spot. Beautiful melodies, beautiful sound selection. The rest of the mix is clear. You've got a good relationship in that kick and bass. Yeah, fantastic work touching up this track, Wesley. All right, so let's give it up for him with Revelation. Up next, let's see, we've got a track submission from Steve out of our Accelerator program. And Steve is saying, hey Neil, I hit a wall with this one as I can't quite get it to work as I'm laying samples with multiple elements, which I think clutters it too much. Could you go from 122, please? The bit I'm struggling with is 146, and then again at 202. All just seems a bit too much and a bit flat compared to how I had it in my head before mixing. Could you also look at like the 336 vocal support and advise what could maybe be done mix-wise to make this sound and sit better? Might be the original sample killing it, to be honest, but there might be something to improve it. Probably a track for the bin, but good to get some tips to learn from at least. Thank you very much. All right, sure thing, Steve. Let's see what we got going on with Up in the Sky. Yeah, let's jump ahead to 122. Good movement on that filter. Great groove. That's dirty groove right there. That's really nice. So I hear what you're talking about with that new element that just kind of came in off to the left side. It does make the track just a little bit busy there. I think you might be able to make it work if you filter out even more of the low end of that sound, and really just get it to sit above those extra synths on the side. So maybe if you just take out a little bit more low end of that new sound at 146, that should do the trick. Making bass relationship sounding pretty good. Oh, you mentioned that 202 moment too. Let me just get back and see if there's something I missed there. So I think this section faces the exact same thing. There's just that one like extra layer kind of off to the left that has a decent amount of mid-range to it. The rest of it I think is totally fine. Like, yeah, there's a lot going on, but it's relatively high frequency and you've done a good job managing your stereo field. So each of those elements is able to sit in like a different location. So we have a clean mix that's not quite too cluttered yet either. But I do think that one layer that's a little bit off to the left could use a little bit less mid-range, and that'll help clear up some of the clutter. All right, and then let's see. We also wanted to look at 336 for the vocal support around there. This does sound really nice. I think the biggest thing to me, the reason why this might not quite work as intended, is that the vocal fundamental frequencies are shared pretty similarly with a lot of the synth fundamental frequencies in that section. So I'm getting just like a little bit of upper mid buildup. Now, you haven't pushed anything too loud. Like, it's not like it's really actively sticking out in a bad way, but it is keeping the vocal from like really feeling supported and full. To fix this, I would suggest adding a little bit more weight to the bass line. And then maybe just side chaining your instrumental against the vocal a little bit more to just create a little bit of extra separation and space between those two elements. The final thing that I'd look for, Steve, is just like in the mastering chain is maybe a little bit more excitation or multiband saturation just to help thicken up the mix and add a tiny bit more high-end pop and energy to it. But as a whole, honestly, really, really great work. So let's give it up for Steve there with Up in the Sky. Up next, it looks like we've got a track coming from Mr. Gabriel out of our Accelerator program. And Gabriel saying, hi Neil, in the EDM Tips community. I made this house track with some funky bass and a future rave first drop. For the feedback, I want to know the power on the drops and some mix and master things I need to fix. Hope you guys like this weird mix between genres. I'm all about weird mixes between genres. So yeah, let's see what we got here, Gabriel, with Déjame Amarte. Or Déjame Amarte.
Déjame amarte. Quiero sentirte cerca de mí. Déjame amarte. Quiero quedarme junto a ti. Déjame amarte.
Okay, I'm getting from Dan that my voice compared to the track volume is a little bit low, so I'm going to turn this down just a touch. Now, if you guys need to turn up the volume on your speakers, you can. That is unfortunately the extent of control I have between those two. Ooh. All right. So Gabriel, I know I was kind of talking over that a little. I'm going to take us back. Okay, so your whole intro is working really, really nicely compositionally. You've done a great job creating loads of space. You have like that really nice low end deep, some tonal percussion, and then pretty much emptiness up to that vocal. So that gives you a lot of clarity in all of those elements. I think what I would like to make this section shine even more is maybe a little bit more brightness and airiness on that vocal. So that can come from using tools like fresh air or even some high-end coloring EQ boost. You really don't need much. Like, this doesn't need to turn into like a bright pop vocal. We just need a little bit more high-end energy on it. And then on top of that, I would also add a little bit more reverb to that vocal as well. I do love the synth riffs that you've got going on in the drop. Your kick and your sub bass relationship seem to be sitting in a pretty good spot right now. I feel like we might be able to use a little bit more body in this track across the board. When I say body, I really mean like that 100 to 500 hertz range. And I think this can come from a mix of things. I think the clap could use a little bit more EQ down there, just a tiny bit more of a boost. Your synths could use just a tiny bit more mid-range thickness as well. Ooh, really nice moment there. You know what? I might have to go back to my kick and bass comment. Like, it is still sounding really nice, but I think you could get a little bit more power out of the sub bass as a whole. Maybe after that transition, I'd love a little bit more of like an impact or an effect splash just to kind of finish that one off. Check it out, this nice build and drop here. Build here. I think at this point, when you start really kind of cutting to that snare build in the synth, I would add some sort of high-end like effect splash just to help kind of trail us out of the previous high-end energy. Nice. Cool composition going on in this drop. In terms of the energy, I think we could make it hit a little bit harder with just simply some added saturation on these main chords. I think another thing that could just help in general, like I said earlier, a little bit more in the sub bass, maybe a little bit more in the bass in the drop here as well. And then finally, just a little bit of extra saturation or parallel compression on the drums just to help picking them up a tiny bit further. Cool. Awesome. All right, well, let's give it up for Gabriel here. Really nice work with this track. Up next, we've got a track, looks like it's coming from Jeff out of our Accelerator program. And Jeff is saying, hey, Neil, this is a track that I made with the new group we formed, composed of Stello, myself, and our friend Stave, who is very talented on the piano. We feel we have a killer track on our hands here and would love your opinion on the first break to the first drop and on the second break through the end of the song. Second break is a very long melodic break, but we feel it's really something special. If you could do the full second break, that would be awesome. Hope you enjoy. All right, yeah, let's see what we got going on here. So, you know, on the first break to the first drop, so that's probably this little guy. Nice vibes here. I think in this section, you could make a little bit better use of the stereo field. Like take those chords and spread them really nice and wide. I would also like a little bit more reverb on those chords to help create a little bit of a sense of space and distance. And then that vocal could use a little bit of extra saturation, thickness, and mid-range EQ to help give it a little bit more power and volume. Really nice drop. Yeah, I think the biggest thing for you is focusing on creating a little bit more sense of front to back depth. So taking a little bit more reverb to like your chord layers, maybe giving a little bit more saturation to some of the top end, like pluckiness of the leads. Your drums are sitting in a pretty good spot right now, nothing too aggressive, relatively chill. You can maybe add a little bit more high-end energy to the snare in particular, and maybe a touch of reverb if you want to increase that impact a little bit further. All right, let's check out the break. Great composition and groove going on here. So Jeff, the big thing that I'm like looking for in this track is a sense of like fullness and warmth, and I think a lot of that's going to come from finding the right reverb. So look around, see if you can't find like a room or a hall style reverb with a lot of warmth to it, and then saturate that reverb to thicken up the reverb and really make that a core part of the sound of all of these elements. That's going to help add a lot of body, space, and just presence to this track, kind of across the board. Not presence necessarily, but like fullness. Love all the little vocal delay effects and stuff that you've got going on here. That's really, really nice. I do think that vocal just needs a little bit more volume in general to like really stand out and cut through the mix. Right now it's actually one of the most distant elements in there, and we do want it to be the most up front. This is really nice. One other thing, so since you're going for that kind of like long ethereal style build, to help add to that sense of power and fullness, I would actually recommend layering in a little bit more bass kind of throughout this entire build, or at least maybe the second half of this breakdown section. And like a restyle bass with a lot of width, a lot of power, but filtered so that you don't have a ton of high end in it. That'll just help add some nice supporting weight to the rest of the tension that you've been building. So in this drop, to really make that drop sound super full, I might recommend taking the lead melody that you've got and either pitching it down an octave or at least layering in a lower octave in there to help add a little bit more mid-range body to it. Just because we've built up a decent amount of mid-range body in the drop, we kind of need to answer that. In the build-up, we need to answer that in the drop. All right, really nice work, the three of you. Let's give it up for Jeff, Stave, and Stello. I don't know exactly who Stave is off the top of my head, but yeah, Stello, shout out to Daniel there, and see you guys in the chat. So yeah, great work on this collab. Keep that going. Like I said, focus on the mix and creating a front to back sense of space. You guys should be golden before too long. All right. Up next, we've got a track submission coming from Paul out of our Radio Ready program, and Paul's just looking for some general feedback, so let's see what we've got with Distrata. Good little groove and energy here from the start. This little blip with a lot of reverb on it. The reverb sounds great, but the initial blip would sound great if it were panned either left or right, alternating between both, or just spread evenly wide. That first pluck of it is in the center of the mix, so it is sitting kind of on top of where the drums are living. Cool. I like this lead. It's got a good energy, a good rhythm, good pattern to it. You can maybe bring out up the reverb tails a little bit more in that sound though. Great build up on the bar. Oh, really cool switch up. Alright, so to make this drop and transition really work, a couple of things. I would recommend bringing out that pre-drop vocal in volume a decent amount. We want that to really stand out and ring out on top of all of the other instruments. In the drop itself, I think we need to bring out a lot more high-end energy on this lead in particular because it needs to be a step up from where the build was at. The build had those lead sounds and a bunch of white noise sorts of riser textures in that. So maybe add some noise to that particular lead in the drop. Otherwise, just saturate it and add a nice hefty high-end coloring EQ boost to bring out that top-end energy. I also think the bass in the drop could use some decent saturation to it to really help picking it up. And then finally, I think the drum kit as a whole could use just a little bit more volume, saturation. Yeah, I think it's really just volume and saturation. All right, otherwise I'd say, yeah, really, really nice riding there. Love the switch up again, the rhythmic switch up in that drop. So let's give it up for Paul there with the Strata. Up next, we got a track coming from Anthony out of our Radio Ready program, and Anthony's also just looking for some general feedback. So let's see what we've got with I Don't Know. Great groove, really cool vibe going on here. Yeah, your groove is really, really strong. This high new bell lead that came in, it has just a little bit too long and present of a tail. So I might take down some of that release or reverb, whatever's causing that kind of like long tail on the sound. And it doesn't need to be taken down much, just enough to maintain that sense of separation between the notes. I do think the kick could use a little bit of extra volume. The rest of your drums are sounding pretty good, but the kick is a little bit lost. I am getting just a tiny bit of like mid-range build-up coming from this like wide melodic synth that's come in. I would suggest just taking a little bit of a low mid EQ dip around the fundamental frequencies of that sound, and that should help kind of clear out that little bit of extra buildup and make it fit into the sense of space where you've got it everywhere else. Another thing I think that could help with the song is maybe just adding one more percussion layer in here every once in a while to help pick up a little bit more ear candy, a little bit more energy. And then on this lead that just started playing there, I might actually recommend opening that filter just a little bit more to give it a tiny bit more high-end energy and presence. That'll help really kind of seal the deal of it being the lead in the drop Sweet. Alright, there's just 10 seconds left. I'll let it play out to the finish. Awesome. Excuse me. Wow. Big sneeze. All right, so thank you. Let's give it up for Anthony there. Anthony, the biggest thing I'd focus on is just getting a little bit more brightness added into your tracks, just in general. Maybe through a little bit more high-end EQ on like the lead, some extra saturation on your elements, and just thickening them up in general. All right, so up next, we got a track from Maxwell coming out of our Accelerator program. He's looking for feedback on the overall track, please. Says the track is still less than 4 minutes, but if you need to start at a certain section, please start at 30 seconds, as that is the first construction of the track. It's still a work in progress and still additioning sounds. I feel like I need to replace the kick or at least boost the low end to add some thump. I've always been a fan of synthwave, but I had no idea how much fun it would be producing in the genre. Thank you and hope you guys enjoy. Awesome, Maxwell. Let's see what we got with Scorpions. Good little start. I would add like one extra layer of texture or interest to that beginning section. Alternatively, you could maybe saturate and bring up the chords more and let the reverb of those chords kind of ring out just a little bit more across the mix. Glibber, I'm seeing your question in the chat. Whether or not we can get to it really just kind of depends on how the flow of this goes. If I do end up with extra time, I'll certainly queue it up. But if not, then you'll definitely be one of the first up for next week. All right, Maxwell. So really nice chill vibe going on here. I think as is, it could be like really nice kind of just low-key background music. But if you wanted to start capturing some ears, there's a couple of things I'd focus on. I think we need to get a little bit more brightness and high-end energy out of the drums. So that's going to come mostly from some saturation and high-end EQ boosts. That'll help drive a lot of extra energy into the track. The bass itself could also use a little bit of extra saturation, but in this case, some multi-band saturation would be best, particularly applied to the top end of the bass, just to help bring out a little bit more of that biting texture. I like that vocal. I like the way it's sitting in the mix. Maybe bring it up just a tiny bit in volume. Right in here, I'm like kind of struggling to like find a focal point in the track because you've got a lot of like washy atmospheric textures between the chords, that like background synthy melody, and like the vocal layers and stuff. I might try adding a little bit more presence to one of the layers at this moment, just so we have a very clear line to be focusing on. The vocal would probably be the best option. You'd mentioned the kick needing a little bit more low end. I do agree. I think that kick is a little bit weak currently in the mix. Actually, what Glitter just said in the chat, I completely agree with. Maybe a little bit more sidechain on the bass will help. Past that, I think the character of your kick is in a good spot. We just need more of that low end thump. So I would suggest a coloring EQ boost to that extreme low end to help bring up that sub thump. Now, Maxwell, every once in a while you have these like nice little like marimba-like synth bell fills. I can kind of hear it playing in the background of the section. That's a really nice sound, and I'd love for you to bring that sound out a little bit more consistently as well. That's the exact kind of element that can be perfect for giving us that foreground, that point of focus, so that we can, really lean into the rest of the atmospheric sound. So if you're looking for things to bring out, take that bell lead, add a little bit more high-end coloring EQ, a little bit more saturation, and then maybe find a way to bring out a little bit more of like the actual thwack sound itself. All right, Maxwell, really fantastic work here. Let's give it up for him with Scorpions. Up next, we got a track submission from Jono coming out of our Radio Ready program. And Jono's saying, "Hi, Neil. The area I'm looking for specific feedback on is from 30 seconds onwards. Does the vocal sit well? Is the bass and sub got enough punch? And are there areas which I could improve? And is the arrangement okay?" All right, yeah, let's see what we got with Keep You in the Dark. 30 seconds. The vocal does have just a tiny bit of harshness in like the 6K to 9K range. It might be worth applying a small bit of extra multi-band compression, or just some de-essing should also take care of that.
I'm only hurting myself, gathering dust on the shelf. So I'm leaving you with that part of me that didn't take care of myself. And I can't believe that I felt.
And then in contrast, I actually think you could use more high-end airiness on that vocal. So even above that 9K, a tool like Fresh Air by Slate Digital with the high setting would be perfect. Nice, really nice drop here. I think we could use a little bit more volume on the drop compared to the build-up. The drop feels just a little bit quiet in FT in comparison to that. So maybe just automate up some extra volume at the drop, or just conversely automate down a little bit of volume in the final moments of that build.
For trusting you so easily. You don't care what the cost.
Now the reverb texture on the vocal sounds really good, but it's a little bit too wet on the front end of each word. I would suggest setting up some heavier side chain compression on your reverb against the vocal. That way the lead vocal itself just seems a little bit more present, but then you have all of that same reverb space filling in the space.
That part of me that didn't take care of myself, and I can't believe that I felt so high. Had me take all the breath from the start. Thought I'd find myself inside your arms.
If you have the option to spread some of those harmonies and stuff really nice and wide, I think that would help out in the section, just add to the sense of fullness. The kick could use a little bit more low-end thump to it. It's currently being dominated a little bit too much by the bass. Now I think the bass is in a good spot. I just think the kick needs more of that thump. So far, I'm completely okay with your arrangement, yeah. This piano is now almost a little bit too bright for the rest of the mix. If you want the piano to be that bright, we also need to then bring up the energy of the drums and a little bit more power from the bass line at this time. Alternatively, you could just maybe dial back the piano a touch in this track. Yeah, you know, actually as a whole, I said the kick and the bass were in a good spot earlier, and they were, but especially at this point, like, I feel like the low end of the mix is really too quiet in general, so both the kick and the bass can come up if the piano's going to be left where it's currently. Awesome. I guess the final thing I might suggest is just a little bit of extra subtle side chain compression on the piano against the vocal, just so that when those two are playing together, the vocal maintains priority. Also try a pretty fast slapback style delay on that piano just to help give it a little bit more space, a little bit more groove and rhythm to it. All right, up next, it looks like we have a track submission from Tommy out of our Radio Ready program. Tommy, unfortunately, it looks like it was missing the private tag at the end, or something happened with it. Let me try reloading it and see if that works. No, it looks like something's just happening with the track, so I don't know if you're in the chat. If you're watching and you can resubmit, feel free to do so. We'll try to get to you at the end of today. Otherwise, just resubmit for next week, and we'll be sure to get to you then. All right, in that case, then we're moving ahead over to Mr. John Holland coming out of our Accelerator program. And John is just looking for some general mixed feedback as ever, please. Saying it's a quick, happy tune based on days at the beach last week to get me back into creating. Awesome. Let's see what we got with Cider on the Beach. Oh, I just saw a little message from Tommy. Tommy, I will need you to resubmit it because I cannot, unfortunately, see links in the chat on YouTube. Nice, happy vibe indeed. Great group going on in here too. So since you're looking for mixing feedback in particular, I think the biggest thing is all about volume levels and balance. Currently, like, the synths and the drums, the top drums are sitting pretty nicely against each other. I'm kind of missing the low end of this track. So I would bring up that kick a decent amount in volume, maybe even find a slightly different kick sample with a little bit more deepness to it. The current one is just a little bit boxy, a little bit rounded. And then I would bring up the bass a decent amount, because I'm not really hearing the bass in it. Rather, I'm hearing a top bass, I'm not really hearing a sub bass. And one thing you'll want to look out for, John, is that this piano that you've got has a really cool texture. It's got a really cool rhythm to it. It's unfortunately so interesting that it's taking away from the vocals because of the brightness, the relative volume levels, and because it has that high melody. So I might suggest when the vocals you're playing, maybe don't play the piano, or if you're gonna play them another octave lower or so. I see your comment in the chat about the bass being filtered out and coming in the drop. You know, I see what you're saying. I think that, yeah, more bass in the kick and this bit, and more sub bass in the bass itself, I think in that bit. Excuse me, both of those would be a good idea. I guess my allergies are like going off on me right now. The one other thing that might work really nicely for this section is finding a piano with a little bit more body and sustain to it. We don't need to go like full concert grand piano sort of weight, because you do want to maintain that lightness of the beat. This current one's just almost a little bit too thin, and it sounds a little distant as a result. I'm not quite getting the sense of body that I would expect to get from a piano that was relatively upfront in the mix. Yeah, I think the biggest thing really for me though is when that vocal is playing, I'm losing my attention to the piano. So bring up the vocal and volume, add a little bit of high-end presence with the fresh air plug-in, and then like I said, revoice that piano a bit so it's sitting in its own space. All right, let's give it up for John with Cider on the Beach. Up next, it looks like we got, all right, so Tommy resubmitted his track, so I'm going to just cue that in and we'll go straight to that since he missed the first one. All right, so let's see. Tommy was looking for, it's supposed to be an EDM festival anthem. Please tell me what I can do better. All right, yeah, Tommy, let's see what we got with We Are the Best.
We are the best.
Fun energy to start here for sure. The vocals might have come in just a little bit loud relative to the volume of those chords, so either vocals down or the chords up. Hearing everything else, it seems more like the chords should come up because the vocals and the kicks fit really nicely. So Tommy, one thing I noticed is that the sub got pretty powerful here, and then it went back to being fairly quiet in this section. I really like where it's actually at in this section. It's just enough low end power. So maybe dial back the sub bass a little bit in the final moments of this first drop-like section. I would bring out a little bit more of the top end of that lead melody right before the final moment of the drop. And then in the drop itself, I think the big thing to focus on is getting a little bit more brightness in the track. So I think the drums themselves need to come up in volume and have a little bit of a high-end EQ boost for that extra brightness. I also think those like fast synth riffs, the da-da-da-da-da-da, could benefit from a little bit of a high-end coloring EQ boost as well. Puma's throwing a suggestion in there for quick triplets in the bass line as opposed to the, like every offbeat kind of pulse. It's worth a shot. I can see it working both ways for sure. I think that dance moves, I think that dance is coming in just a fraction early. Might be worth nudging that vocal sample a little bit to the right in your arrangement so that it kind of comes in exactly on those new notes. like this melody coming in. Final thing I would recommend is in the vocals, it sounds like you've got like this artificial kind of pitched up layer in there. I would dial back the volume of that artificially pitched layer just a small bit and lean a little bit more into the brightness of the original lead vocal itself using a tool like that Fresh Air plugin. Awesome. All right, really nice work here, Tommy. Let's give it up for him with We Are the Best. So up next in the queue then, I do have a track coming from Colin out of our Accelerator program. And Colin saying, "Hi Neil, looking for some general feedback on mixing quality and composition from 346, which is the climax, into the main drop. Thanks a lot in advance. Looking forward to it." All right, let's see what we got with his entrance. And yeah, I'll jump ahead to like 346-ish. Nice vibe and composition here. I think because you've got like the low mid strings really nice and wide, it would also make sense to have that top end string be really nice and wide. Same thing for this buzzy layer. I think a lot of width would just be really appropriate to kind of fit the more atmospheric feel. So I love how that's panning off to the left and kind of moving around the stereo field. I think in general you could just start that a little bit earlier so that we're really leaving the center of the mix open for those drums. On that note, I think we could thicken up the drums and bring a lot of brightness to them. So loads of saturation, decent amount of high-end coloring, EQ boost is going to just bring out a lot of that brightness in those drums. Kick and your sub bass relationship is working nicely. Your overall mix is sounding really balanced. Big thing that I'm really going after with this extra brightness, these couple of suggestions that I've given so far, is a little more front to back separation in the mix. You've got a pretty decent sense of left to right separation among your elements. The stereo width things that I've suggested have been more so for like the vibe and the atmosphere as opposed to like mixing conflict so far. I hear this like melodic arp in the background that I'm just now picking up on. I think you need to bring that layer up a little bit because it does carry the biggest form of melody. It's going to be the most interesting element to everyone. Really, it's also one of the most quiet. So I would just bring that up in volume at least every once in a while so that it kind of swells in. We have that melodic pattern, and then maybe it comes back to the current volume. Side chaining on that bass would help with a little bit with the groove and the rhythm going on in this track. Awesome. Maybe just a tiny bit more reverb and or delay on this like lead like that, like kind of like lead synth riff that plays every once in a while in this section. Just a tiny bit more reverb and delay would help fill in some extra space there. All right, let's give it up for Colin with his entrance. Up next, we got a track coming from Daydreamers out of our Radio Ready program. And the comment here is, "It's my attempt at drum and bass." So yeah, let's see what we got going on with this drum and bass ID. Groove, nice rhythm here. I would make sure that that snare is sitting right in the center of the mix. And actually the same thing goes for the whole drum kit. The drums as a whole right now seem like they're weighted a little bit to the left side. Really love the width and the energy on your synths though. My one concern with your synth sound design so far is that you got a lot of like noisy, high-end energy style textures. And that by itself isn't a problem, but what it's doing is it's ending up sitting on top of where the drums are going to live in the mix. So you're going to get some conflict between the drums and the top end of these like bass synths. So you can keep the majority of the bass synths as is. I would either sidechain the top end of those basses or like these squelchy sounds against the drums for a really, tight, fast sidechain so that the drums continue to poke through. Alternatively, just have like an EQ dip at around like 7 to 9 kilohertz in this bass line, just to make a little extra space for the top end of those drums. I would agree with Mint Puma's, like that noise is maybe just a little bit too constant. Like on this main synth riff that was playing, the wah 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 sort of sound. Like Mint Puma saying, like, maybe use it for interest. So take out that noisy layer for a lot of it, but then every once in a while throw it in exactly as it is. Or maybe go in and out with the amount that you have kind of over time. Otherwise, though, the vibe, the space, the energy of the track is sitting really, really nicely. So really great work on that. The big thing, like I said, get those drums to the center. Focus on creating a little bit more space between the drums and those basses as a result. All right, let's give it up for Daydreamers there. Up next, we've got a track coming from Donnie out of our Radio Ready program. And Donnie's just looking for some general feedback here. So let's see what we got with Omni-Man 2 Conqueror. Nice open space to start this track. The groove of the piano seems to be a little bit off of the groove from the kick right now, and I'm trying to decide basically if that's a good thing or a bad thing. A little bit of looseness here and there is really cool to like help create a little bit of a sense of uncertainty before the beat kicks in. But I think because of how unique and sporadic this whole beat is against the piano, I would try to align those a little bit more tightly so that those downbeats of the piano and the drums really do closely align. Ooh, cool switch up here. One thing I would say is that this does almost feel like two different songs as opposed to like one song, because the piano just kind of faded out and this new one just kind of faded in. Like if I heard this live, I would expect that a DJ just kind of basically faded out one track and faded in the new one. If you want to make them part of the same track, I would either go for a little bit of a quicker transition or incorporate some more of like a build or a fill or something here as opposed to just kind of fading out the piano. Really cool energy going on here. I think the thing in this section that I'm looking for would be a little bit less brightness on this high lead synth. It's a little bit too present, a little bit too high-end frequency driven. And then I think we could also use a little bit more like low, mid, and low-end bass for this section as well. Nice melodic repetition going on here. I am hearing one kind of note that's a little bit off in here. I'm getting a diminished tone or a diminished interval relationship between a couple of notes. So just check the notes right in here. Make sure you're not getting any of those diminished relationships, which would be two notes at the same time that are only 6 semitones apart. Yeah, I'll send kind of my same comment as I said earlier. The biggest thing for this track would be to get a little bit more presence in the kick, specifically weight in the low end of that kick, and then a bass line to accompany that. I think you've got a good sense of rhythm in the drums. You've got a great sense of energy and fullness in the mid-range and high end coming from the synth. It really is that low end that's really missing for me. All right, overall, really nice work there. Let's give it up for Donnie. Up next, we've got a track coming from Gordon out of our Radio Ready program. And Gordon's saying, "Hi, Neil. This is a track I've been working on and off over the last couple of weeks. Wanted to make a funky house track for a while as I played slots of funky house when I was DJing, as my name was G-Funk Bailey." Great name. It's partly mixed, but I still think it's missing something. Thanks. All right, let's see what we got with I Know You Love It. Nice rhythm going on in the drums. I do think your reverb or atmosphere textures are just a little bit too loud. It's like there's one layer that sounds like a kind of like almost like a sustained filtered string might be it. That's just staying consistent throughout here. That's just a little bit too powerful for me. Just dial back the volume of that layer. Bass has a cool texture to the top end of it. I feel like the low mid end of it's almost a little bit too pronounced. So I might suggest a little bit of an EQ dip around that 100 to 200 hertz range just to help take out a tiny bit of that extra body. Vocals working nicely. I think to make this vocal pop a little bit more, the reverb is kind of swallowing up the vocal currently. So if you can sidechain that, or sidechain the reverb against the vocal, just so that when the lead sings again, that we get a lot of presence on the voice, that'll help. To couple that, I would also add a little bit of fresh air to help bring out that extra brightness, which will just further emphasize the sense of presence in the vocal. That one crash impact might be just like probably 5 or 6 decibels too loud. I'll just dial that back in volume a bit.
You wanna dance?
Getting a little bit of low mid build up in that you wanna dance vocal, so maybe just consider cutting out some of the low end. This section, your sub bass is actually a little bit strong, which is honestly a good problem to have. I would just simply dial back the volume of the sub bass by probably about 4 to 6 decibels. In this section on, I would like a little bit more high end out of the drums, so just a little bit of extra saturation, a little bit of like a upper mid range and high end coloring. The same goes for the top lead melody that you've got playing through this section as well. Cool. All right, let's give it up for Gordon there with I Know You Love It. Really nice work. Up next, we got a track coming from Philip out of our Accelerator program. He's saying, "Hi Neil, I would like an overall feedback. I think the vocal is too repetitive like this, but I don't know better yet." All right, let's see what we got with Don't You Ever Try. Nice groove going on here. Like those little clap fills that you've got. Really nice melodies going on throughout this whole section. Cool. So in the drop, this is the first thing. So I like the drums and the kind of like relatively more distant, laid-back feel of the entire intro and verse. In the drop, we need to bring a little bit more presence and energy into this section. So I would start with just adding a nice little high-end coloring EQ boost to the drums in the drop to just help bring out a little bit of extra presence. Good thump going on the kick. I'm hearing a tiny bit of fundamental frequency buildup around like 150 hertz or so coming from the bass. It's not the sub bass, but like the bass just above that. Try dialing back that EQ around 150 just a small bit. That should clean up a little bit of extra headroom. I think like all of the effects on the vocal are just a little bit too distracting. I would sidechain some of those effects just a touch against the lead vocal so we get a tiny bit more presence on them. It doesn't need to be heavily sidechained because a lot of the feel that we're getting out of this comes from that kind of reverbed sort of vocal sound. But I think even just a little bit more space will create a lot of beneficial clarity for the track. Ooh, love that little vocal delay at that moment. Really nice energy in this build. Final comment I have for you is bring out a little bit more high-end energy of the lead in this drop as well. Cool. All right, let's give it up for Philip here with Don't You Ever Try. Really nice vibe, really nice groove through and through. Up next, it looks like we were going to have a track submission coming from Mark out of our Accelerator program. Mark, I don't know if you're with me. It does look like the link that you've submitted for whatever reason is not working. I know you submitted 2 links. I've checked them, and neither of them were really quite working for me. So, Mark, if you don't mind either just resubmitting really quickly, I can get to you at the end of this session. Or if you just watch the recording, if you don't mind resubmitting again for next week, we'll be sure to get to you as one of the first up. All right, so then in that case, we do have a track coming from Mr. Dan Westlake. And tell you what, other Dan Glibber, I do see that we have a little bit of time, so I'll cue you in as well, and you'll be the one that kind of closes us off. So, second to last, and certainly not second to least, is Mr. Dan Westlake coming out of our Radio Ready program. And Dan is wondering, is the drum and bass relationship working at 102? And is the mix as a whole working at 423? All right, let's see what we got with Beautiful. Great groove and vibe as always. So, yes, the kick and bass relationship is working. However, I think we could make it work a little bit better through a little bit of a compositional change. So currently, every downbeat, you have the kick and the bass hitting together, and it's a pretty big moment for both of those lanes. As a result, we can't like sidechain one of them out against the other. They both have to play. Because of that, we get a little bit of like muddiness, build-up, and lack of separation on every downbeat of every measure. So what I would recommend doing is playing around with a little bit of syncopation, maybe every other measure on that downbeat. So the first measure, start on the downbeat. The second measure, maybe don't play the bass on the downbeat with the kick, and instead play it on the upbeat 16th note that immediately follows. Try playing around a little bit with that rhythm. You might be able to create a little bit more separation between the kick and the bass as a result. Now on top of that, I do think maybe just a tiny bit of a low-end EQ boost to that kick could help out. Doesn't need much though. That vocal would sound really nice spread super wide. I would try the vocal doubler by Isotope because it naturally creates like a doubled texture and can add a lot of really natural feeling width to the vocal. I do think the drums in general could use a little bit more high-end energy to them, so maybe just a little bit of a high-end EQ boost across those drums would help out. And then finally in the bass, there might be just a tiny bit too much buildup around like 90 hertz or so, like about 90 to 140. Very subtle EQ dip range in that area should help out. And then let's check out 423, check out the mix in that moment. Oh, I like that piano. Yeah, I see Puma just dropped a suggestion. What about a little harmonizer on the vocal? Make it sound like a couple people. That is actually exactly what the vocal doubler does. Now, it doesn't technically add harmonies as much as it adds like a doubled take, but it does sound like a group of people singing. Alternatively, you could create harmonies for that as well. Dan, the melody, the vibe of this drop, I think is working really nicely. My same comments from earlier apply. Want a little bit more brightness on the drums, a little bit less build up from that bass, a little bit more separation between the kick and the bass. Yeah, I wouldn't say anything is really too different in this section. Tiny bit of fundamental frequency buildup in that piano, the sustained piano as well. So it might be worth applying just a very subtle EQ to those fundamental frequencies. All right, let's give it up for Dan with Beautiful. I would say that is indeed beautiful. All right, so then last but not least, we've got a track submission coming from another Dan out of our Radio Ready program. And Dan's looking for feedback on 230 and the drops after that. So let's see what we've got with Future Rave here. Nice energy here in the break. I think you could start adding a little bit more reverb across all of these elements at this point. I hear it like sneaking in, but you could get a little bit more aggressive with it a little bit more earlier in the track. The other thing, by starting that reverb earlier, you'll be able to create more tension earlier and spend these final moments a little bit more washed out, which will give us a stronger moment of contrast in that transition into the drop, which I think will work in your favor. I love the lead riff that you've got playing right now. It's a really, really catchy riff. As a whole, your kick and your bass relationship is pretty close to where it needs to be. I think you could use a little bit more low end thump on the kick in particular. And actually just a little bit of extra volume on the kick would also help. The sub bass is actually in a pretty good spot. You might be able to bring up the sub bass just a decibel or two in the mix, but only after you bring up the kick a moderate amount on top of that. Similar comment that I've been given to a lot of people tonight. I think we can use a little bit more high-end energy in some of the drums. You really don't need a ton for yours because you are really close, but I think just a tiny bit of a high-end coloring EQ, particularly on your snare, would be helpful. I think your hi-hats are actually pretty good as is though, so I wouldn't really adjust the hi-hats too much. I think another thing that could really help this track, so you kind of have this same like 16th note rhythm going on in a lot of the synths. The bass line, I think, has a degree of that. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm hearing that in the bass line as well. If you could tighten up the envelope of that bass line so that we get a da-da-da-da-da-da-da with a lot of separation between those note hits in the bass line as well, I think that would help with a little bit of energy, a little bit of clarity, and a little bit of drive in this track. Like this little melodic switch up. This is working nicely too. I think your leads in the drop could use a little bit more airiness in them, so that'll come from a high-end coloring EQ boost and or a little bit of Slate Digital's fresh air plugged in on top of that. Awesome. Yeah, I would agree with what Huma just dropped in the chat. Sound selection is spot on here. Really, really nice work, Dan. Yeah, let's give it up for Glibber there with Future Rave. And with that, guys, we have come to the end of this week's Tuneful Tuesday. So thank you very much for joining me. For everyone who submitted their tracks, fantastic work once again. I love watching you guys improve so quickly. You guys are well on your way to some professional music, and I'd say plenty of you are already there. It's just now going to be a matter of putting your brand out into the world and getting the artist project side of it to work. A huge shout out to everyone who submitted and everyone who joined me for the stream today. Thank you very much for tuning in. Once again, guys, for those of you watching for the first time, if anyone's interested in getting additional feedback on your tracks like this, all you need to do is be enrolled in either the Radio Ready program or the EDM Tips Accelerator, and you will have indefinite access to these Tuneful Tuesday streams to get track feedback delivered to you on a regular basis. Now, for those of you that might be on the fence or wanting to learn a little bit more about those particular programs, you can learn more in the link in the description of this video. It'll take you to our website where you can just, understand kind of what the course content is. But on that page, there will also be a chance to book a call with one of us at EDM Tips, and you can have a one-on-one with us. It'll be a brief chat just to see exactly where you're at with your music production journey, maybe offer you a couple of pointers right on the spot, and then also see if the Accelerator or the Radio Ready program would indeed be a good fit for you. So I would recommend checking those out, guys. As you just heard from the stream, the students going through those programs are getting a ton out of them. We're hearing some really, really high quality tracks as a result. We love to keep that information and that education spreading. So if you guys are on the fence, please do check it out. We'd be happy to chat with you about it. And with that, guys, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday and week ahead. And I'm already looking forward to catching you guys next week on the next Tuneful Tuesday. Cheers, everyone.